I cheated on my wife with her best friend, and now she's suing me over the $300, $0 inheritance I promised her, claiming I secretly planned to steal the house and all our savings. What do I do? I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here telling a story like this, but life has a way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect them. One night I was scrolling through my phone, just killing time after a long day at work, when I stumbled across a message that made my stomach drop. It was from Lisa, my wife's best friend, telling her how much she loved her, how they couldn't keep their hands off each other anymore, and that they were planning a weekend getaway. I saw the message, and suddenly my world turned upside down. Lisa, my wife, Sarah, has always been the kind of woman who's quick with a smile, but I started noticing little things that didn't add up. She'd leave her phone lying around more often, and her excuses for staying late at work or meeting friends became thinner. I'd catch her in little lies, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was just paranoid. But that message, that was the nail in the coffin. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that she was cheating on me with her best friend. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My mind raced. I couldn't believe she'd do this to me, especially with Lisa, someone I'd always thought of as harmless, even friendly. The betrayal cut so deep I couldn't breathe properly. I didn't even confront her right away. Instead, I waited until the next day, trying to piece everything together. I had to be sure. So I started digging through her phone, her email, her social media accounts. It didn't take long. I found more messages, flirty texts, secret calls, plans to meet up alone. It was clear she'd been lying to my face for months. When I finally showed her the evidence, Sarah's reaction was a mix of anger and denial. She told me I was crazy, that I was reading too much into things, that Lisa and she were just best friends, and that I was overreacting. She called me paranoid, insecure, and accused me of snooping because I didn't trust her. But I knew the truth. I saw the way she looked at Lisa, like she was craving something she wasn't getting from me anymore. The worst part, she had the nerve to say I was overreacting, like I was the one causing problems. The emotional impact hit me hard. I felt numb at first, then furious. How could she do this? How could she lie so blatantly? I'd always thought we had a good life, nice house, steady jobs, a future we planned together, but all of that was suddenly meaningless. I started questioning everything. Was I not enough? Did I miss signs? Was I blind? I couldn't sleep, kept replaying every moment, every conversation, trying to find where it all went wrong. And then came the anger, hot, uncontrollable rage. I wanted to confront her again, to scream at her, to tell her she'd ruined everything. But I also felt something else, deep sadness. I had invested so much in this marriage, in Sarah. She was supposed to be my partner, my best friend. Instead, she was sneaking around with her so-called best friend, lying to my face and tearing my life apart. It was a mess I didn't see coming, and honestly, I didn't know how to handle it. All I knew was that I had to figure out what to do next. After that night of discovery, everything changed. I couldn't look at Sarah the same way. The woman I thought I knew, my wife, was suddenly someone I barely recognized. The trust was shattered, and the betrayal felt like a knife twisting deeper every time I saw her. I started feeling like I was living someone else's life, caught in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But I knew I couldn't just sit around feeling sorry for myself. I had to come up with a plan, and fast. First thing I did was gather all the evidence I could, screenshots of the messages, emails, even a few photos I managed to sneak from her phone when she wasn't looking. I wanted to be prepared, just in case she tried to deny everything or spin a story. I also started paying closer attention to her routines, her calls, her whereabouts. I needed to understand her mindset, her next moves. Because if she was cheating, she'd probably try to cover her tracks, especially now that I knew. I decided I wouldn't confront her outright again, not yet. Instead, I wanted to see how far she was willing to go, how much she was really hiding. I started making plans quietly, carefully. I knew that Sarah had a temper and she was capable of twisting things to her advantage if she thought she could get away with it, so I played it smart. I didn't let her see that I was onto her, at least not at first. I kept my cool, acted normal while secretly building my case. But then things got even more complicated. Out of nowhere, Sarah started acting distant, cold even. She'd snap at me for no reason, accuse me of trust issues, and say I was paranoid. I could tell she was trying to gaslight me, make me doubt what I knew was true. Meanwhile, she was still sneaking around, I was sure of it. I caught her leaving her phone open once and I saw a new message from Lisa. It was a picture of them together, smiling with a caption, "Can't wait for the weekend." That was the final straw. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what yet. I just knew I couldn't keep living in this chaos, pretending everything was fine. Now I started thinking about the bigger picture. Money, inheritance, the house, things that mattered more than anything. Sarah had always been obsessed with money, and I knew she was eyeing the inheritance I was supposed to get from my grandfather's estate. I had promised her she'd get a good chunk of it, about $300, $0, once everything was settled. But now I wondered if she was planning to take that money and run, or worse, try to manipulate me into giving her more. I was starting to see her greed, her manipulative side, and how far she'd go to get what she wanted. I also remembered something my grandfather told me years ago. Never trust a woman who's too eager for money or power. I never really took it seriously until now. Sarah always had her eye on the inheritance, even before the affair. She'd drop hints about how we should be smart with money, how she wanted a big house, fancy vacations. Looking back, I realized she was planting seeds, waiting for the right moment to pounce. I had to be careful. I couldn't let her manipulate me or turn this around on me. So I started thinking about my next moves. I knew I had to protect myself legally and financially. If she was planning to sue me over the inheritance, I needed to get ahead of it. I reached out to a lawyer, explained everything, and started collecting more evidence of her behavior. I also made a plan to confront her with everything, but not until I was fully prepared. I wanted her to see that I wasn't just some naive husband. No, I was ready for a fight if she wanted to play dirty. Meanwhile, I kept my emotions in check. I was furious, yes, but I knew I had to stay calm. I couldn't let her see how much she'd hurt me or she'd use it against me. I started distancing myself emotionally, pretending everything was normal, all while secretly preparing for what I knew would be a showdown. Deep down, I felt like I was already losing her, but I also knew I had to fight for what was mine, my dignity, my inheritance, and whatever respect I could salvage from this nightmare. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Every morning I woke up feeling like I was walking on eggshells, trying to keep my cool while inside I was raging and hurt and confused all at once. Sarah kept acting like everything was normal, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She was tense, defensive, and increasingly manipulative. She'd throw little jabs, accuse me of spying on her, or say I was losing my mind. I knew she was trying to gaslight me, but I refused to let her get under my skin. One afternoon, I decided to take a more direct approach. I sat her down in the living room, looked her right in the eyes, and told her I knew about her affair with Lisa. I laid out the evidence I'd collected, the messages, the photos, the secret plans, her reaction. She sneered, rolled her eyes, and said I was crazy, that I was just jealous and insecure. She told me Lisa was just her best friend, and that I was overreacting because I was paranoid about losing her. But I wasn't buying it. I could see her trying to spin the story to make me doubt myself. That's when I realized I had to get more serious. I told her I was done playing games, that I knew she'd been lying for months and that she was trying to manipulate her way out of it. I also dropped the bomb about the inheritance, how I was planning to protect my rights, and that I wasn't going to let her take what was rightfully mine. Her face twisted into a mixture of fury and contempt. She spat at me, told me I was a terrible husband, and accused me of trying to control her life. I couldn't believe how far she was willing to go to deny everything, even as her own words betrayed her. That night, I stayed awake, thinking about the next steps. I knew she'd try to turn the situation around, maybe even threaten to leave or accuse me of abuse or something worse. I had to be ready. I contacted a lawyer again, gave him all the evidence I'd gathered, and asked about my legal options. I also started making copies of every financial document I had, bank statements, property titles, her emails about the inheritance. I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way into my money or my house. I knew she'd try to spin things in her favor, but I was prepared to fight dirty if I had to. Meanwhile, I kept my distance from her emotionally. I didn't want her to see how much she was affecting me. I pretended everything was fine, went through the motions of normal life. I still went to work, kept up appearances, but inside I was boiling. I knew she was planning her next move, and I had to stay one step ahead. I also started thinking about how I'd confront her legally if it came to that, how I'd protect my inheritance, and how I'd deal with the fallout if she tried to take everything from me. The biggest shock came when I found out she'd been secretly talking to a lawyer of her own. I overheard her on the phone saying she was going to fight for what's hers, and that she knows how to play the game. That was a wake-up call. She wasn't going quietly. She was prepared to go to battle, and I had to be ready for a long fight. I realized then that this wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about her trying to control my money, my house, my future, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. So I decided I'd do whatever it took to protect myself. I was already planning to file for legal separation, start the process of dividing our assets, and make sure I had everything documented. I knew she'd try to spin her lies, but I had the evidence and I was ready. I also started secretly talking to a financial advisor about how to safeguard the inheritance, and I began drafting a plan to get everything legally on my side. I didn't want her to win, not over my money, not over my house, and definitely not over my life. I'd come too far and I knew I had to stay strong. The tension in the house was unbearable. Every day felt like walking through a minefield, waiting for the next explosion. Sarah's attitude grew colder, more dismissive. She'd throw tantrums over the smallest things, calling me paranoid, accusing me of trying to control her, saying I was just jealous of Lisa. Honestly, I didn't even bother arguing anymore. I just kept my head down and focused on my legal preparations. I knew I had to act quickly before she spun her own version of the story and tried to manipulate the situation further. One afternoon, I decided I'd had enough of her games. I sat her down again, this time with a lawyer's letter in hand. I told her I was filing for divorce and that I was going to protect my inheritance at all costs. Her reaction was a mix of fury and disbelief. She spat at me, called me a controlling bastard, and said I was trying to ruin her life. But I stayed calm. I told her that I knew everything about her affair, her lies, her plans to take the house, and her attempt to manipulate the inheritance. I warned her that if she kept pushing, I'd go all the way to court to get what was legally mine. That night, I started meticulously organizing all our financial documents. I wanted everything clear, transparent, so she couldn't twist it later. I contacted a lawyer specializing in high net worth divorces and inheritance disputes. I knew she was planning some kind of counterattack, maybe even trying to claim I was abusive or unfit. I had to be ready for anything. I also took steps to secure the house and our savings, changing passwords, making sure the accounts were protected, and documenting every transaction. I was playing it smart, making sure I had the upper hand, because I knew she'd do whatever it took to get her hands on my money. Meanwhile, she kept trying to manipulate me, saying I was being unreasonable, that she loved me, and that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. But I could see through her lies now. The woman who once told me she'd always be loyal was now just a schemer, trying to keep her grip on everything she could get her hands on. I started realizing how much she'd been planning this behind my back, how she'd been using her friendship with Lisa not just for some affair, but as part of a bigger scheme to take what she thought was hers. One night, she called Lisa over, and I overheard snippets of their conversation through the thin walls. Lisa was promising her she'd help her get everything, and that they'd find a way to make him pay. That was the moment I decided I had to cut her out completely. I couldn't trust her anymore. I knew she was capable of anything, lying, cheating, even worse, if it meant getting her way. I also started talking to a private investigator, just in case I needed more proof of her plans or her meetings with Lisa. I knew this was turning into something bigger than just a cheating scandal. It was about her trying to steal my house, my savings, and maybe even use the inheritance to fund some new life for herself. I couldn't let that happen. I had worked too hard for everything I had. The hardest part was facing the reality that my marriage was over. I'd always believed in loyalty, in sticking things out, but her betrayal broke something inside me. Still, I refused to let her see how much she'd hurt me. I kept my emotions tightly controlled, knowing that if I let her see my pain, she'd try to use it against me. I stayed focused on my legal and financial plans. I knew she'd try to spin this into a pity story or accuse me of being the bad guy, but I was prepared. I wasn't going down without a fight. Every day I felt the weight of what was coming, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I saw through her manipulation, her lies, her greed. I knew I had to stay strong. I had to protect what was mine, and I was going to make sure she paid for what she did, one way or another. The battle was just beginning, and I was ready to see it through to the end. The legal process dragged on, and I could feel the pressure mounting. Sarah was no longer pretending to be innocent. She doubled down on her manipulations, trying to spin the story in her favor. She hired her own lawyer, of course, and started filing papers, claiming I was abusive, that I was trying to control her, and that her affair with Lisa was just a mistake she was trying to fix. She even accused me of planning to steal the house and all our savings, claiming I was secretly plotting to cut her out of everything. It was classic gaslighting, but I knew better. I had all the evidence, and I was ready to fight her every step of the way. Meanwhile, I moved forward with my own legal plans. I filed for divorce, making it clear that I intended to protect my inheritance and assets. I also started the process of dividing our property, making sure I had everything documented. I knew she was planning her own countermoves, so I took extra precautions, changing passwords, securing the accounts, and even installing cameras in the house just in case she tried to tamper with anything. I didn't trust her one bit anymore. One night, I caught her trying to sneak out late, talking on the phone with Lisa again. I could hear her whispering about covering her tracks and getting everything she wants. That was the final straw. I knew she was actively trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage, but I wasn't going to let her. I confronted her directly, told her I had enough. I said I was done playing her games, and if she kept going down this path, I'd have no choice but to go to court and fight for full custody of the house and my inheritance. The emotional toll was enormous. I felt betrayed, angry, and exhausted, all at once. I'd loved this woman, trusted her, built a life with her, and now I was fighting for my future against someone I once thought was my partner. I couldn't sleep, kept replaying every moment, every lie she told me. The worst part was knowing that she'd been lying to me for months, maybe even years, hiding her affair with Lisa and her greed for the inheritance. It was like my entire life had been a lie, and I was left standing there, trying to pick up the pieces. But amidst all this chaos, I realized I had to keep my focus. I couldn't let her manipulate me into giving her what she wanted. I had to stay strong, protect my rights, and prepare for what was coming next. I hired a forensic accountant to help me trace every dollar she tried to move or hide, and I kept working with my lawyer to build a case that would hold up in court. I knew she'd do everything she could to turn the tables, but I was ready. I was tired of being the victim, tired of her lies, and tired of feeling like I was losing everything I'd worked so hard for. At the same time, I started thinking about my own future. I knew I'd have to rebuild after this, no matter what the outcome. I'd lost so much already, the trust, the marriage, the sense of security. But I also realized I still had my dignity, my strength, and my ability to move on. I was going to fight for what was rightfully mine, and I was going to make sure she didn't walk away with everything. The truth was out now, and I was determined to see this through to the bitter end. I didn't know what the final outcome would be, but I knew I wouldn't give up without a fight. The court date finally arrived, and I knew this was the moment everything would be decided. I'd spent months preparing, gathering evidence, consulting lawyers, and planning my next moves. Sarah and her lawyers came in with their stories, trying to paint me as the villain, claiming I was controlling, abusive, trying to steal her happiness. but I had everything laid out in black and white. The proof of her affair, the financial documents showing her attempts to hide assets, the messages where she openly discussed her plans to take the house and the inheritance. When the judge called the case, I laid it all out calmly, presenting every piece of evidence I had collected. I explained how Sarah had lied, cheated, and manipulated her way into my life, and how her accusations against me were just her latest attempt to save her own ass. I made it clear that I was fighting not just for the house or the money, but for my dignity, my future, and the truth. Sarah's face was a mix of fury and helplessness as the judge listened. She tried to argue her case, but it was clear she had no real ground. Her lies fell apart under the weight of the evidence. I could see her realizing she was losing, that her scheme was unraveling. When the judge finally ruled, it was in my favor, awarding me full custody of the house, protecting my inheritance, and ordering her to pay legal fees for her false accusations. The aftermath was a whirlwind of emotions. I felt relief, anger, and a strange sense of closure all at once. Sarah was furious, screaming at me as she left the courtroom, calling me every name in the book. But I didn't care. I had fought for what was rightfully mine, and I'd won. I knew she'd try to come back, try to manipulate or threaten me, but I was done playing her game. I was finally free from her lies and her greed. In the weeks that followed, I moved out of the house, started rebuilding my life. I cut ties with Lisa and Sarah completely. The inheritance was safe, and I was able to put some of the pieces back together. I learned a lot from this nightmare, about trust, about greed, and about how far people will go when they think they can get away with something. I realized that the only person I can really count on is myself, and that sometimes you have to fight tooth and nail to protect what's yours. Looking back, I wish I'd seen the signs earlier, but I also know that I did everything I could to stand my ground. I learned that betrayal cuts deep, but resilience is even stronger. If there's one thing I want others to take from this, it's that no matter how dark things seem, don't give up. Trust your instincts, protect your assets, and never let anyone steal your peace or your future. Because in the end, the truth will come out, no matter how much someone tries to hide it.